All right, everybody. Hey, how's it going? Good to see all of you. Today, we're going to talk about the movie 12 Angry Men. Yeah, that's our next film. Of course, we watched The Breakfast Club. Now we're watching 12 Angry Men. And this is a great movie about group communication. And there's been a lot of versions of it. It started off as a teleplay for like a TV movie in the early 50s, I believe. And then there was a 50s movie starring Henry Fonda. And then there's this black and white version that we're looking at, which came out in 1997. And so lots of different cast members. What's interesting about this is I've actually seen people coming from various backgrounds and various cultures play the different roles, and they're pretty interchangeable, believe it or not. So that's kind of an interesting aspect of it we'll talk about. But the reason we're looking at the film is to not because this is a film studies class, but because we're looking at people that are coming from various points of view on a jury trial, and we're looking at group dynamics. So it's a group of men who have been asked to judge the guilt or innocence of a boy that's been accused of killing his father. And, you know, it ends up being that we get to see all the dynamics come into play. I mean, the decision making has to be, for the big decision they have to make for guilt or innocence, has to be unanimous. And then the little mini decisions don't have to be unanimous. But you don't see a lot of unanimous decisions being made, or where you have to make a unanimous decision in life. But that's definitely the case here. What else can I say about the basic setup of it? We'll also look at conflict in addition to decision making. We'll look at the roles they take on. We'll look at the way that a hip pocket agenda can play itself out. All those things sort of come together in this film. But what I'm going to do now is just kind of go through the basic characters of the film and kind of talk about them one by one. And I think that'll be pretty useful for you. Okay, so let's start with that. And we're going to go to our PowerPoint. All right, so this is 12 Angry Men, and to be specific, it's the 1997 version of the film. And here's the entire cast sitting down across the jury room. And some of these actors you might recognize from television or movies. And like I said, this has been done many ways, and they've done it with different cast members, and they played with different cast members coming from different backgrounds, and having a multicultural cast versus a more homogeneous cast, having diversity or not having as much diversity. So this is the cast. This is a good version of it. It's in color, and as you know, you can watch it in our class through iLearn. Okay, let's take a look. So juror number one, you might recognize this actor. His name is Courtney B. Vance, and I know him from Law and Order. I think also he was in the O.J. Simpson movie, if you ever watched that. Not the documentary version, but the film version with John Travolta. Well, he played, I think, Johnny Cochran, O.J.'s lawyer. So anyway, he's a really good actor, and his name is Courtney B. Vance, but his character, we don't know his name. The character is never revealed. Sometimes people call him juror number one. He's the jury foreman, a high school football coach who tries to keep order amid the hostilities between the jurors. So he's become the jury foreman. I don't know if it was assigned by the judge or something he volunteered for. But in terms of roles, he sort of takes on the role of the procedural technician. And also he's definitely tries to be a harmonizer as much as possible for this group, where there is some conflict. His conflict style tends to be very collaborative for the most part. He's like, we're all in the same boat, folks. So he's definitely a character. I think this jury would have been lost to a certain extent without him. He does a great job. And I've just seen different versions of it. I really like what Courtney B. Vance does with this. But yeah, conflict style wise, in my opinion, he's collaborative. Maybe you might disagree or agree. But he tries to keep the group in order and just have a discussion. He tries to not be biased. He does think, initially anyway, that the young man is guilty of killing his father, and then it goes from there. So he's a pretty good guy. So that's Courtney B. Vance. He plays the role of juror number 1, or jury foreman. Okay, moving on to juror number 2. This is Ozzie Davis. I think he's in Friday with Ice Cube, if I'm not mistaken. But juror number 2, he's a meek bank teller who initially does not know what to make of the case. And he, conflict-wise, he takes on the avoidance tactic quite a bit. But later he really does deviate away from that. Just initially, he's sort of a avoidance type technique of handling things a little bit. Like they say, he's meek. He's not as, in your face as some of the other characters. But this actor does a great job of it, by the way. I love seeing him in different movies. It's Ozzie Davis. Really great guy. And he's juror number 2. And he's also very instrumental. Like, he's a good recorder too. Like, he remembers what other people have said quite a bit. If you watch the film carefully, you'll notice that he a lot of times will remember what the different characters have said. So that's another thing that's really good about him. Excuse me. Okay, let's go to juror number 3. Some people call this the angry father. It's played by George C. Scott, who's famous for playing Patton in the movie Patton. He's angry for most of the movie. And he's a businessman with a hot temper. He is estranged from his son and is convinced that the defendant is guilty. His conflict style is competitive, very competitive, always trying to one-up people, name-calling, just angry all the time. And he seems to have a personal vendetta against the defendant based on not so much on age, I think, is the main thing. Because he has an issue with his son and he thinks all young people are terrible, basically. So he's a good example of the competitive style. He's also very aggressive in terms of roles. He's the aggressor. He takes on the role of the aggressor because he's upset about his son and he's taking it out on basically everybody. But yeah, this is good to see George C. Scott in action. Quite a good actor. It's interesting. I've watched also the black and white version of this, and he's a little bit more subdued than the version that is in black and white. That other movie that maybe some of you have seen, the Henry Ford version, but he's still pretty amped up for most of the film. And then we come to juror 4, which is a stockbroker. He is very eloquent and considers the case through facts and not bias. He tries to be anyway. And this is Armin Mueller-Stahl is the actor that plays that role. He's a great job. This guy is definitely, his conflict style, I think, is sometimes competitive, but mostly his collaborative for the most part. He is trying to work with everybody to get to the bottom of like what happened in this situation, what happened in this case, and he's trying not to be biased for the most part. And then we come to juror number 5. He's a healthcare worker, possibly an EMT, who grew up in the Harlem slums. We don't use that word slums too much, but that is a term that was popular in the 50s, I think. So that's why they've kind of kept it over from the original movie of the 50s. This is played by Dorian Harwood, which I've seen in a zillion movies. He's a really good actor. He's been in lots of stuff and a lot of TV shows and whatnot. But yeah, so he's, the thing about that's important, the reason they mention that he grew up in what they're calling a slum or an economically disadvantaged area is that there's a lot of classism in the film that you see come across where they're judging the defendant because the defendant is supposedly, came from this poor background, and they have all kinds of judgments about the defendant because he came from this economically challenged background. And he's coming back and saying, hey, don't be so judgy. Don't be so judgmental. This guy, yeah, he did come from an economically, challenging area, but that doesn't mean that he's necessarily a bad person or actually did this crime. So he really stands up for people who are economically disadvantaged. And I think some people call him Milwaukee, I believe, or Wisconsin, because he's like everybody in there is a Yankees fan for the most part, and he likes a different baseball team. So that comes up a few times where they call him, Milwaukee or something like that. Okay. Juror number 6. So this gentleman, this is James Gandolfini. You probably know him from a lot of different movies. He was in True Romance. That was where I first saw him. You might know him from The Sopranos. He plays a house painter. He's really respectful of others. One role that he takes on quite a bit is the role of being the standard setter. Like when people are mistreating each other in this film, he really encourages them to be nice to each other. And that's really great. And, particularly when there's ageism going towards the old man, he really stands up for him. His communication style is very collaborative throughout the whole film almost. But then when it comes to, he tries to be collaborative, but then when people keep disrespecting the old man or disrespecting each other, he gets a little competitive at times. So, but yeah, he's a really great actor and does a great job in this role of being somebody who like upholds standards of like, because they're sort of rude to each other, and he kind of is like, wait a minute, don't do that, don't be so rude to each other. So yeah, and at times he's willing to compromise too. His conflict style is compromise as well. You'll see that. Okay, here we go. Juror number 7. Some people call him the baseball fan, played by Tony Danza. When you might know Tony Danza from Who's the Boss, if you ever watch old 80s TV shows. He's quite cool. But yeah, his character is kind of obnoxious in this, and this is a good example of a hip pocket agenda or a hidden agenda. Well, it's not so hidden actually. He wants to go to the baseball game, so he kind of making all kinds of excuses about leaving the meeting early so that he can go to the baseball game. And it's kind of annoying to other people after a while. It's like, don't you realize there's somebody's life is at stake? And what's fascinating about this is that I think this movie is pretty much filmed in real time, and it's the movies, like the original version of the movie is only like an hour and a half. This one's like 2 hours. Can't we spend 2 hours for somebody who could be on death row? It's one of those things where, to me, it sort of speaks to the idea that the lives of people that have been accused of crimes, the lives of people that may come from the margins do matter too. We can't just say we're not going to spend time discussing this person's guilt or innocence just because of one thing or another, like one characteristic they have or several characteristics they have. We owe it to them to discuss this before we come up with a decision. And he wants to rush off to a baseball game. He just doesn't care about anybody but himself. He also thinks he's super funny, so he's kind of a joker. Like, not everybody's laughing all the time at his jokes. His conflict style ends up being pretty competitive to try to get to the game as soon as possible. Sometimes he does avoidance too, just to try to get to the baseball game. He'll do anything to get to the baseball game. So he does sometimes competitive, sometimes avoidance, but not much of a critical thinker. So really cool character though. This is Juror 8. He's the one, who basically initially considers the idea that the boy may be innocent, and he's willing to vote not guilty. His last name is Davis. Most people just call him the architect. He's played by Jack Lemmon, who is famous for, I think, being in the Days of Wine and Roses. Super famous actor in Hollywood of yesteryear. He's an architect who has 2 children. He is the only juror to originally vote not guilty and repeatedly questions the evidence of the case. He uses all the conflict styles, but I think he gets the furthest when he's compromising. Once in a while, people are so rude that he does use the competitive style. But there's a point at which he does use the accommodation style, where he says, hey, if you guys all keep voting not guilty, guilty, then I'll just go along with everybody else. And you know what happens if you've seen the movie. It doesn't, there's one person that changes their vote, so he gets his way with that. But it's an interesting example of the accommodation style there. In terms of roles, he's definitely like constantly asking other people their opinion. He's the information seeker, the opinion seeker, and then giving his opinion and giving information, and then just offering analysis. He's really good coordinator. He brings together everybody else's ideas. So by using a bunch of different conflict styles and taking on a bunch of different roles, he's able to kind of get what he wants, which is for the people to take this trial more seriously. And he's really saying, there's someone's life at stake. Life matters, and just because this person might come from a different culture than you doesn't mean their life doesn't matter. That's really what he's getting to. Juror 9, last name McCradle. He's a wise older man who sides with Juror 8. He's an interesting guy. It's played by Hume Cronin. He doesn't start off being necessarily in favor of helping out the defendant, but he's persuaded a little bit, and then he just wants to collaborate so badly, and so he ends up collaborating. So his conflict style is definitely collaboration. Competitive at times, but mostly collaboration, mostly very, very collaborative individual. And he's willing to do the right thing even if it's not popular. So he gets a lot of pressure from the other people for even considering Juror 8, Davis, Jack Lemmon, the architect's point of view. He gets a lot of, pushback for that. Okay, this is a great character. Some people call him the bigot because he's pretty racist. This is Juror 10, a car wash owner and former Nation of Islam member. He is a loudmouth, narrow-minded bigot. He's very racist. And, obviously we don't like people to be racist, but I do like this character because he really shows how people can be racist and really helps us understand the roots of racist thinking. I've seen this played by different people of different backgrounds. I've seen it played by, an actor of European descent. I've seen, in this case, an African-American actor. It kind of plays the same way. A racist is kind of a racist sometimes. It says he's formerly part of the Nation of Islam. That's the group that Malcolm X was part of, and then he left, actually, if you're not familiar with that whole idea. Spike Lee made a great movie about Malcolm X if you ever get a chance to see it, and then you can learn more about the Nation of Islam. But anyway, there's one thing he says at one point, how these people are, they don't value life very much. That's why they're more likely to do a murder. And it's this false thought that some cultures value life more than others really comes across here. And then kind of the roots of all the racism, he'll say things like, I'm not racist, but, and then he'll say something racist. Or he'll say things like, well, how these people are, they're all the same. He'll say a lot of things like that are just like classic racist thinking. And like I said, I've seen different people play this in the 1950s version. A man of European American descent plays it, so it just depends. But really good example there, and it helps us like unpack racism. Obviously, I don't like racism. I'm not racist, but this character it helps us learn so much about racism, is why I like it. In terms of conflict styles, competitive, very, very competitive, constantly using the competitive conflict style. So that's huge, and you can see that throughout the film. In terms of roles, he's definitely an aggressor. He has an issue, obviously, with the racial background of the defendant, and he's taking it out on basically everybody in the room and the defendant. So yeah, very good example of that too as well. Doesn't really listen. He's definitely an opinion giver, a lot more than an opinion seeker, and an information giver of his opinion, I guess, or his not so much his opinion, but definitely his opinion, but also the things he observed, but not listening to other people very much. All right, next step. Oh, here we go. Juror number 11, Edward J. Olmos is the actor that plays him. You might know him. He's in Miami Vice. He's the police chief, and then he's in American Me and Stand and Deliver, and so many great movies. Battlestar Galactica, the TV show. Just a great actor. He's a Latinx actor, actually. So he's one of the most famous Latinx actors in the United States, I think. One of the most, maybe not the most, but one of the most. But he does a great job here. He plays an immigrant watchmaker. They don't really say where he immigrated from, but he's an immigrant watchmaker. He's observant, yeah. So he's kind of a recorder and believes in the American justice system. That's where he's a standard setter. He constantly is reminding us of what the standards are we should live by. His conflict style is collaborative up to the point where he's getting annoyed that people don't value the system, and he can get a little competitive at times for that. But he does that in a collaborative kind of way too. Like it's kind of halfway between collaborative and competitive, but he doesn't avoid conflict as much. So very good character. The thing about a lot of people don't really understand the American justice system, and that you're innocent until proven guilty, and that in some countries they don't have that. I mean, we fail at it all the time, but we try to make people innocent until proven guilty. And, as opposed to other countries where they just, they'll have the police decide, or a judge will decide without much input from other people. So we have a juror of 12 in this case that decides. And that's, he reminds us to value that as well. And then juror number 12, he's a big avoider. He wants to avoid conflict as much as possible. And he does that with jokes. He's kind of like a joker as a way to take on the avoidance strategy. So he's just always joking around and joking around and joking around, constantly trying to crack everybody up. You might know this actor, William Peterson from CSI. He's pretty popular on that. So, yeah, he's a pretty cool juror. And he's an advertising executive. So he's like really proud of it. So he's like almost a special interest pleader in terms of, not special interest pleader, but attention seeker for being an advertising executive and wanting to get credit for that, even though it's not really relevant all the time. But it's kind of a joker. His conflict style is definitely avoidance. He's always trying to avoid conflict as much as possible to just get through the day, and doesn't take the whole thing seriously at all. He's definitely doesn't seem to think, I don't know if he's racist in the life doesn't matter of the individual, or he just nobody matters but him. I'm not sure, but he definitely does not take this thing seriously at all. So that is 12 Angry Men. So I'm sure you've seen the movie by now, hopefully. But if not, go ahead and watch the rest of it. And there'll be some assignments and forums and whatnot related to it. And I'd love to hear your opinion about the film through all those different vehicles. And taking a look at it. But really, the reason we're looking at this film is because of decision making. We want to see how people make decisions. The big decision is made, consensus. Everybody has to agree. But sometimes it's majority rules, of whether or not they're going to discuss it longer or not, for example, or whether or not they're going to take a break. It's a lot of times it's majority rules where type decision making. At some point, so I think, some of these people would like to rather just flip a coin or something, just get out of there. They don't want to spend time making decisions. And, high quality decisions do take a while to make. And so it takes time to make high quality decisions. And I don't know that they want to take the time to do that. So yeah, it's a pretty good film for understanding group communication, looking at the conflict styles that people use, looking at the roles they take on, decision making. This thing about the hip pocket agenda, where somebody has this agenda item like wanting to go to a baseball game, and that's like it's affecting them, and they pretend like they're saying things for one reason, and then you notice the architect constantly points out that the baseball fan is saying what he's saying because he wants to get to the baseball game. And that idea of a hip pocket agenda or a hidden agenda that's always right in the background is super interesting as well. But yeah, it's a cool film. I hope you enjoy watching it, and let me know if you have any questions. Email me if you have any questions. Enjoy the forums, and the midterm 2 I think is on this topic, and I think you'll enjoy it. I certainly have over the years. I've watched it different versions, and there's also a lot of examples in this film of racism, just throughout. You just see that throughout, not just the one character that's obviously racist, but there's a couple of things that people say that are kind of racist. And so we'll discuss that too as well. And love to get your opinions and thoughts on it, and looking forward to everything. So enjoy the movie and let me know if you have any questions.